COVID. Still having a knock-on effect in my life. I'm due to complete a commission this month, which I'll unfortunately be unable to complete in the allotted timeline, because supply chains around the world are disrupted, we are facing challenges with Brexit, and it just feels like everything's coming to a head at once, so I have a gap in my schedule. The client knows we're as frustrated as each other for not being able to get this done in time, but it does mean it's opened a small window in my schedule. And selfishly, I'm not filling this up with commission work. I'm not taking on any extra work. So I decided, okay, let's paint a Krieg army. Let's see how quickly I can smash this thing out. I decided to make an excellent video as well on how I approach mass workflow, how I go about creating a scheme, and how I simplify that scheme to create an army very quickly. So here it is. Here's the video on, I guess, mass infantry. I need to come up with a better phrase for this. Mass infantry painting, army painting, the art of compromise. Yes, that is a hashtag suggested by a student, and yes, it did feel very cringy to say it out loud. Tip numero uno, tip number one, buy a diary, buy post-it notes, buy writing materials. Okay, here's my number one tip. Physically write down your goals. CNBC, with a wonderful clickbait article, states that you are 42% more likely, 42, that's nearly 50%, more likely to attain a goal when you write it down. And the reference for this is Dr. Gail Matthews from the Dominican University of California. All right, thank you, Dr. Matthews. Whether this is true or not is debatable. After all, there are lies, damned lies, and then there are statistics. You can massage the numbers any which way you want to make the point you're trying to. But anyway, beside that point, whether it's true or not, I found personally, for me, this holds true. There is a strange alchemy in writing. It's sort of like forming an idea. Okay, last thing in the evening, when you're dreaming, you have this idea. It comes to you with such precision, such clarity that you can't help but wake up and scribble it down. There's forming an idea out of nothing and transmuting it into something physical that you can touch and see and have an influence on the world around you. Even if that scribble note is a dodgy picture of a cat that you draw for your son. But anyway, this is the grand end goal. The big idea picture. This is the single sentence that encapsulates your idea, what you want to achieve. In this case, my tagline, my big idea, my tip number one, the first thing I write down on that brand new piece of paper is paint an army of Krieg in as little a time as possible. What this does as well is clarify our workflow moving forward, and it also gives us an idea of the numbers involved. Krieg being a mass line infantry army, being an Astra Militarum or Imperial Guard army, we aren't dealing with, say, like a Grey Knight army or a Custodes army. Mass volume, mass quantity. We aren't going to be painting these for a competition either. The individual model won't look great in isolation. It's not meant to. This is a speed painting exercise after all. My intention is to paint these very quickly to, well, a decent enough standard. But speed is more of my concern rather than employing new techniques. We need to retain, well, in effect, we need to retrain our eyes. We don't want to see the individual miniature. That lovely Praetor that you converted, the Nagash that you've painted up, the thing that you've practiced a new technique on and you're really proud to show it off to the world. You need to think of showing off this army en masse. The mass army becomes the miniature, it becomes the focal point, this mass spread of infantry. The mass is what we will be judged by, not individual detail. Tip 2. Take the grand plan and break it down into goals. Okay, so what is the grand plan? Paint a Krieg army. From this we can break it down into 3 goals. We need to paint the infantry, paint tanks, paint characters. So already you're starting to see how we're chipping away at this big obelisk of an idea that we have in front of us, this insurmountable task, this Herculean task that we set in front of us to paint an army. By breaking it down into small segments, we're able to give ourselves more clarity in what we want to achieve with each of these goals. So, paint a Krieg army. How do we break this down into 3? Paint infantry, paint tanks, paint characters. These are the 3 different disciplines, the 3 main components of the army that I think would make it look good, make it look like a cohesive army. And they are 3 very different disciplines. Now there's a large overlap between the infantry and the characters, but the tanks are something separate entirely, so I'll pop those off to one side for the moment. I'll return to them at a later date. They won't affect what I'm doing with the infantry right now. So I know I can spray the infantry and the characters at the same time. I can add some very broad strokes across all the infantry all at once. I'll set these aside, I'll set the tanks aside, I'll set the characters aside once I've airbrushed everything, and concentrate on the mass infantry alone. So already I'm starting to break this down into smaller segments, more easily manageable segments. Tip number 3. Divide these goals into 3 actions. So we can start to see the spreading influence, like the tree chart that we're creating here. I'm sure that I haven't come up with this at all. I bought a diary a few years ago and I had this methodology inside it. I'm sure there's a technique or a name for this, very corporate I'm sure, but I don't know the name for it. I spent a minute researching it and decided it didn't really matter if you knew what the technical term or the corporate term for what this exercise is. Someone will tell me in the comments, hopefully. If they don't, well, will it enrich your lives anymore for knowing this name? Who knows? Anyway, back to the point. Divide those goals into 3 actions. So we have paint infantry. That's the goal. What are the actions I need to achieve this goal? Break it down into 3 again. Airbrush. I suppose I should assemble it all, but that's kind of a given, right? Assemble undercoats, etc. But coming to the main ship of it. Okay, airbrush it. So I can airbrush everything at once, all at the same time. It'll all be broadly in this green khaki colour. Next up, oils and enamels. These are such a time-saving measure. Oils and enamels, especially enamels, because they dry quicker. I know after the airbrush stage, I'll be blocking in all the colours. Very laborious, but not that technical. It's just one of those things you need to get through. So the metallics, the golds, the leather pouches, just one flat colour on there. The depth will come from the enamels, the depth will come from the oils, which we'll get onto during the painting portion of this video tutorial. And then thirdly, details. So details like the heads and any weathering. The old adage of faces and bases are very much in action here. If you get the face correct, or if you get the face nice and you get the base well, the rest will sort of look after itself. Now, Krieg have the advantage of being a very well sculpted miniature. It's something I've talked about with students, that the worse the sculpt, the harder you need to work as a miniature painter. You need to almost obfuscate, we need to cover up the miniature in fancy painting techniques. So underglow, overglow, loaded brush, cool things to distract the eye away from maybe a not that great of a sculpt. We don't have that problem with the Krieg. We can paint these very, almost like shallow. Shallow. Yeah, let's go with that. We don't have to put that much effort into making the Krieg look good because the underlying sculpt is just so good anyway. So we'll be employing primarily a zenithal highlighting technique to this army to create the effect. Ultimately, we're trying to show off the miniature in all this grandeur. So spending a little bit more time on the face, a little bit more time on the base, will yield us a bigger result than we would, and say, on an orc sculpt or I don't know, like a Primaris Marine. Not that those are bad sculpts, it's just it's very rare that you get a collection of miniatures as well sculpted as the Krieg army that we're dealing with in this video. Now we have a structure, we have a plan, we have a workflow. The plan, paint a Krieg army. The goals, paint infantry, paint tanks, paint characters. The actions behind those, for painting infantry we need to airbrush the lot of them. We then need to apply oils and enamels over the top. And then we need to detail the heads and add a little bit of weathering to make the miniatures look good en masse. And that's the video. It was a nice, short, sharp, I guess, thought reflection on how to go about breaking up these monolithic projects, and it could be applied to any army. It doesn't need to only be mass line infantry, it could be a smaller force of custodies, 3 or 4 miniatures. What this does do is help break up that mental load, but the biggest drawback, the biggest obstacle in our way that I haven't addressed, yes, maintenance of aim, focus. Because we have all these lovely miniatures in front of us, but there's always that next thing coming out. Games Workshop, every week, they dangling that carrot in front of us, and we, the donkeys, can't help but nibble at it. Be a stoic donkey, stay away from the carrot, maintain focus on the miniatures you're painting on the desk in front of you. And that's the hardest trick of all, the mastery of oneself. Not becoming distracted and staying with a single project. Thank you so much for listening to the video, watching the video. If you would like to see the full tutorial, the full process on how these were painted, they'll be up on the Patreon right now. The Patreon is designed as a learning resource for all miniature painters, no matter if you're starting, if you have an airbrush, if you don't. It's meant to be an investiture in your own skills, because how many times, how much plastic crack do you have lying around? Why not invest in developing the skills to paint it all? And hopefully this video will give you a little teaser and at least a structure on how to begin tackling those hoards, those projects that we all have in the closet of shame or opportunity. We need to start thinking of it as a closet of opportunity. Let's reframe the argument. Okay, thank you very much guys, I'll catch you in the next video. Bye 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 bye.